The security camera footage was crystal clear. Margaret Whitmore, the iron-fisted HOA president who'd made Sarah's life a living hell for 3 years. Floating naked in Sarah's backyard pool at 2 a.m., champagne glass in hand, laughing with her cronies like she owned the place. But what Margaret didn't know was that Sarah had been watching for weeks, documenting every midnight swim, every stolen moment of luxury, and tonight, the cops were already on their way. The woman who'd fined Sarah for everything from non-regulated mailbox colors to excessive garden gnomes was about to learn that Sarah Martinez stood at her kitchen window, steam rising from her coffee mug as she watched the sunrise paint her backyard pool in shades of gold and amber. 3 years. 3 years she'd been living in the Willowbrook Estates, and every single day had been a battle against the woman who ruled this suburban kingdom like a medieval tyrant. Margaret Whitmore. Just thinking the name made Sarah's jaw clench. The HOA president had made it her personal mission to make Sarah's life miserable from the moment she'd moved in. First, it was the mailbox, apparently. The previous owner's forest green was non-compliant with the association's strict beige-white policy. Then came the garden gnomes that Sarah's late grandmother had given her, deemed excessive lawn ornamentation when she'd displayed more than the permitted 2 decorative items per front yard quadrant. The fines had been relentless. $50. For leaving her garbage cans out 30 minutes past the designated pickup time. $75 for hanging laundry outside to dry on a Sunday. $125 for planting roses that were apparently too vibrant for the community's understated aesthetic vision. But the pool had been the final straw. Sarah had saved for 5 years to install a modest but beautiful, kidney-shaped oasis that had cost her every penny of her savings and then some. She'd dotted every I, crossed every T, submitted the proper forms to the HOA Architectural Committee 6 months in advance. Margaret had delayed the approval process for 4 months, demanding revision after revision to the plans, citing everything from potential noise concerns to impact on neighborhood property values. When the pool was finally approved and installed, Margaret had immediately launched a campaign of harassment. Noise complaints about the pool pump that ran during permitted hours, accusations of excessive water usage during the drought season, despite Sarah's meticulous conservation efforts. Citations for pool toys left out overnight, for the pool lights being too bright, for the contractor's truck being parked in her driveway for more than the allotted 2 hours during maintenance visits. The woman was relentless, cruel, and absolutely drunk on the tiny amount of power her position afforded her. Sarah took another sip of coffee and turned away from the window. She had a presentation to finish for work. She was a marketing manager for a small tech startup, and today's client meeting could make or break their quarterly projections. She couldn't afford to spend another morning obsessing over Margaret Whitmore's latest petty tyranny, but as she sat down at her laptop, her phone buzzed with a notification from the Ring doorbell app. Someone was at her front door. Sarah's heart sank as she opened the app and saw Margaret's angular face filling the screen. The woman looked like she'd stepped out of a 1950s etiquette manual. Silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, pearls at her throat, lips pursed in permanent disapproval. She was holding a clipboard, which was never a good sign. Sarah considered ignoring her, but Margaret had a key to the front gate and wouldn't hesitate to use it. Better to face the music now than deal with whatever bureaucratic nightmare she'd concoct if ignored. "Good morning, Margaret," Sarah said, opening the door with a forced smile. "What can I do for you, Ms. Martinez?" Margaret's voice was crisp, professional, and absolutely devoid of warmth. "I'm here to conduct a routine inspection of your property for compliance violations. At 7:30 in the morning, the HOA bylaws clearly state that inspections may be conducted at any reasonable hour." "I consider this reasonable," Sarah bit back her first 3 responses, all of which would have involved creative suggestions about where Margaret could file her clipboard. "What exactly are you inspecting?" "Reports have been made about unauthorized modifications to your pool area." Margaret consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision, specifically the addition of what appears to be a security camera system without proper architectural committee approval. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had installed cameras to discrete units that monitored her backyard and the pool area. After the constant harassment, she'd wanted to document any trespassing or vandalism attempts, but she'd been careful to research the HOA rules first. Security cameras were permitted as long as they didn't point toward neighboring properties or violate privacy expectations. The cameras are completely compliant with HOA regulations, Sarah said. They only monitor my own property. That remains to be determined. Margaret's smile was razor-sharp. I'll need to examine the positioning and coverage area of each device. The fine for unauthorized surveillance equipment is $500 plus removal costs. This is harassment. Margaret, pure and simple. This is community standards enforcement. If you have a problem with the rules, you're welcome to attend the next board meeting and voice your concerns through proper channels, the next board meeting. Sarah had tried that route before, sitting through 2 hours of Margaret's parliamentary procedure theater while the woman systematically shot down every resident concern, every suggestion for rule modifications, every attempt at reasonable discourse. The other board members were either Margaret's personal friends or too intimidated to cross her. "Fine," Sarah said, "but I'm coming with you, and I'm recording everything." Margaret's eyes narrowed. Recording board business is permitted. Recording harassment is not. Good thing this isn't harassment then, isn't it? Sarah grabbed her phone and followed Margaret around to the backyard. The pool looked pristine in the morning. Light crystal clear water, perfectly manicured landscaping. Every pool, toy, and piece of equipment stored exactly where it should be, according to the HOA guidelines. Margaret made a show of examining the 2 cameras, taking photos with her phone, measuring distances from the property line with the tape measure she'd brought for the occasion. She dictated notes into a small recorder, her voice taking on the tone of a police detective investigating a crime scene. Camera 1 appears to be positioned 18 inches from the northwest property boundary, she said into the recorder. Potential privacy violation for neighboring residents. Camera 2 has line of sight to the community walking path, possible surveillance of public spaces. That's complete bullshit, Sarah said, her patience finally snapping. The cameras are mounted on my house, pointing into my yard. They can't see anything beyond my property line. Language, Ms. Martinez. We maintain certain standards of conduct in this community. Standards of conduct. You want to talk about standards? How about the standard of not harassing your neighbors? How about the standard of not abusing your position to settle personal vendettas? Margaret turned to face her, and for just a moment, Sarah saw something flicker in the woman's eyes. Not anger, something colder, more calculating. "I think we're done here," Margaret said. "You'll receive written notice of any violations within 72 hours. Good day." She walked away, leaving Sarah standing beside her pool, hands shaking with rage and frustration. $500. For security cameras that were completely legal and necessary because of Margaret's constant harassment, it was insane. Sarah pulled out her phone and called her friend Jessica, who lived 2 streets over in the same development. "Jess, it's Sarah. Margaret just hit me with another bogus fine. $500 this time. Jesus, Sarah, what for now? The security cameras. She's claiming they're unauthorized surveillance equipment. That's insane. Half the houses in the neighborhood have Ring doorbells. Are those unauthorized surveillance too? Apparently not. Those are doorbell security devices. These are unauthorized surveillance equipment. Margaret's invented a whole new category of violations just for me. This has to be illegal. Can't you sue her or something? With what money? Between the fines and the legal fees, I'd be bankrupt before I ever got to court. And even if I won, she'd just find new ways to make my life hell." Sarah sank into one of her patio chairs, looking out at the pool that had been her dream and had become her nightmare. "I don't know what to do anymore, Jess. I'm thinking about selling the house." "Don't you dare. That's exactly what she wants." "Look, my cousin's a lawyer. Let me give him a call, see if he has any ideas." "Thanks, but I can't afford, just let me ask, okay? This is bullshit, and someone needs to put Margaret in her place." After hanging up, Sarah sat in her backyard for a long time, staring at the pool. She dreamed of lazy weekend mornings floating in the water, of summer barbecues with friends, of finally having a space that felt like home. Instead, she had a constant source of stress and a growing pile of frivolous fines. The irony wasn't lost on her. Margaret lived in the largest house in the development, with a massive backyard pool that would have been perfect for entertaining. Sarah's coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't tear herself away from the laptop screen. What had started as a simple review of security footage had become something far more disturbing. She'd been scrolling through night after night, of recordings, and the pattern was unmistakable. Margaret Whitmore had been using Sarah's pool for the past 3 weeks. Not just trespassing, actually using it, swimming in it, entertaining guests in it. The first incident Sarah could find was from 3 weeks ago. The timestamp read 1:43 a.m., and there was Margaret, clear as day in the infrared footage, letting herself through the back gate with what appeared to be a key. She'd moved with the confidence of someone who belonged there, stripping down to a swimsuit and sliding into the pool like she owned the place. But that was just the beginning. 2 nights later, Margaret had returned with a friend, another woman Sarah didn't recognize. They'd brought towels, drinks, and what looked like pool floats. The footage showed them laughing, splashing, completely at ease in Sarah's backyard sanctuary. By the end of the first week, it had become a regular party. Margaret and 3 other women, all appearing to be in their 50s or 60s, treating Sarah's pool like their private country club. They brought wine, cheese plates, inflatable rafts. One night, Sarah watched in horror as they'd moved her patio furniture to create a more comfortable seating area around the pool. "You have got to be kidding me," Sarah muttered, staring at the screen. The most recent footage was from just 2 nights ago. Margaret and her friends had stayed until nearly 4 a.m., drinking what appeared to be champagne and taking turns on Sarah's pool slide. Sarah's hands were shaken as she compiled the footage onto a flash drive. This wasn't just trespassing, net was breaking and entering, theft of services, property damage, and probably a dozen other charges. Margaret had been systematically violating Sarah's privacy and property, while simultaneously fining her for imaginary violations. The woman had been literally swimming in Sarah's pool while writing citations for Sarah's excessive water usage. "Hey, I talked to my cousin about your situation," Jessica said. "The good news is that what Margaret's doing sounds like harassment, and there might be legal remedies. The bad news is that proving it could be expensive and time-consuming." "Jess," Sarah said, her voice barely controlled, "I need you to come over right now and bring your cousin if he's available." "What's wrong, you sound? Just come. Trust me, you're not going to believe this." 20 minutes later, Jessica was standing in Sarah's living room with her cousin, David, a criminal defense attorney who specialized in property crimes. David was younger than Sarah had expected, maybe early 30s, with a kind of intense focus that suggested he took his work seriously. "Show them," Sarah said, turning the laptop around. She played the compilation she'd created to highlight, reel of Margaret's midnight pool parties, complete with timestamps and clear footage of faces. Jessica's mouth fell open. David leaned forward, his expression shifting from polite interest to professional intensity. "Holy shit," Jessica whispered. "She's been throwing pool parties in your backyard." "For 3 weeks," Sarah confirmed. "Every few nights, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. They've been using my pool, my furniture, my utilities. Meanwhile, she's been fining me for everything from camera placement to pump timing." David was taking notes on his phone. "This is breaking and entering, trespassing, theft of services, and potentially criminal harassment. The fact that she's been issuing citations while simultaneously committing crimes on your property could constitute abuse of power under the state's public corruption statutes." "Can we get her arrested?" Sarah asked. "We can definitely file a police report. With this much video evidence, the DA would have a strong case. But before we go that route, I want to understand how she's getting access to your property. Do you see how she's getting in?" Sarah pulled up the footage from the back gate. "She has a key. Look, she's not picking the lock or climbing the fence. She's just unlocking the gate like she belongs there. How would she have gotten a key?" "I have no idea." "What?" "The HOA has a master key policy for emergency access. All homeowners had to provide copies of their keys to the association when they moved in, supposedly for situations like medical emergencies or fire department access." David and Jessica exchanged glances. "So she's been using HOA emergency keys to throw pool parties," David said. "That's not just trespassing. That's abuse of her position as an HOA officer. This keeps getting better." "Better for prosecution," Jessica added. "Worse for Margaret." Sarah felt a surge of vindication mixed with fury. "She's been making my life hell for 3 years, and the whole time she's been using my pool like her personal resort." "The hypocrisy is staggering," David agreed. "But here's what we're going to do. We're not going to tip our hand yet. You're going to let her have one more pool party. What? With witnesses, if possible. The arrest will be much more dramatic and the charges will be harder to fight if she's actually caught in your pool when the cops arrive. Sarah stared at him. You want me to let her keep using my pool? Just one more time. Set up additional cameras if you can. Get the best possible footage, and then we spring the trap. Trust me, the satisfaction will be worth the wait. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept checking the security camera feeds on her phone, waiting to see if Margaret would make her usual appearance. Part of her hoped the woman would stay away. This whole situation was insane, and she just wanted it to be over. But another part of her, the part that had been humiliated and harassed for 3 years, wanted to catch Margaret red-handed. She wanted to see the look on the woman's face when she realized she'd been caught. At 1:15 a.m., Sarah's phone buzzed with a motion alert from the backyard camera. There she was. Margaret, letting herself through the back gate with her stolen key, carrying what looked like a bottle of wine and a pool, float-shaped like a flamingo. Sarah's heart raced as she watched Margaret strip down to a one-piece swimsuit and ease into the pool. The woman actually sighed with pleasure as she settled into the water. Taking a sip of wine and looking around Sarah's backyard like she was surveying her kingdom, the audacity was breathtaking. Sarah grabbed her phone and called David, who'd given her his emergency number. She's here, Sarah whispered. In the pool right now. Perfect. Are you ready to do this? More than ready. Okay. Call 911. Tell them you have an intruder in your backyard pool. Don't mention the HOA connection or the ongoing harassment. Say someone broke into your property and is currently swimming in your pool. The simpler, the better. Sarah hung up and dialed 911, her hands shaking with adrenaline. 911. What's your emergency? I have an intruder on my property. Someone broke into my backyard and is currently swimming in my pool. Are you in immediate danger? I don't think so. I'm inside my house, and the intruder is in the backyard. But someone definitely broke into my property. Officers are on their way. Stay inside and don't confront the intruder. Sarah hung up and returned to watching the security feed. Margaret was floating on her back, wine glass balanced on her stomach, looking completely at peace. She had no idea that her world was about to come crashing down. The police response time was impressive, less than 8 minutes. Sarah watched on her phone as 2 patrol cars pulled up to her house, their headlights cutting through the darkness. Margaret was still in the pool, oblivious to the approaching storm. Sarah met the officers at her front door. There were 3 of them, 2 uniformed patrol officers and what appeared to be a detective in plain clothes. Ms. Martinez. I'm Officer Rodriguez. You reported an intruder? Yes, in my backyard pool. I have security footage showing how she got in. She, the intruder, is a woman. She's been breaking into my property for weeks, using my pool. I just discovered it tonight when I reviewed my security footage. The detective stepped forward. I'm Detective Morrison. Can you show us the security footage? Sarah led them to her laptop and played the compilation video. The officers watched in silence, their expressions shifting from professional concern to obvious bewilderment. Let me get this straight, Detective Morrison said. This woman has been throwing pool parties in your backyard for 3 weeks, and you just discovered it tonight? I installed the security cameras because I was having problems with my HOA president harassing me. I was reviewing footage to document pump timing for a noise complaint, and I found all this HOA president. Officer Rodriguez asked. Margaret Whitmore, Sarah stopped, remembering David's advice about keeping it simple. She's been issuing frivolous fines and citations for months. That's why I installed the cameras. The officers exchanged glances, and the woman in the poulis that the same HOA president. Yes, detective. The next morning, Sarah woke up to 17 missed calls, 43 text messages, and a news van parked outside her house. What the hell? She muttered, grabbing her phone to check the messages. Most were from neighbors, friends, and people she barely knew, all asking variations of the same question. Is it true about Margaret? The first text was from Jessica. Oh my God, turn on Channel 7 News now. Sarah stumbled to her living room and turned on the television. The morning news anchor was standing in front of what looked like the Willowbrook Estates entrance sign. Shocking. Arrest of an HOA president who allegedly used her position to gain access to a resident's private pool for unauthorized late-night swimming parties. Margaret Whitmore, 58, was arrested last night on charges of trespassing, breaking and entering, and theft of services after police found her swimming in a homeowner's pool at 1:30 a.m. Sarah's doorbell rang, then rang again and again. She peered through the window and saw a reporter with a camera crew standing on her porch, some pointing at her house, others talking animatedly among themselves. This was not what she'd expected when she'd called the police. Her phone rang. David, the attorney. "Sarah, have you seen the news?" "I'm watching it now. How did this get out so fast?" Police scanner apps. Someone heard the dispatch about an HOA president being arrested for swimming in someone else's pool, and it went viral on social media. The story's already been picked up by 3 local news stations and 2 national outlets. National outlets, apparently, HOA president arrested for midnight pool parties is exactly the kind of absurd news story that gets people's attention. "But Sarah, we need to talk. There's been a development." "What kind of development?" "Margaret's been released on bail, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is that when they processed her arrest, they discovered she's been embezzling money from the HOA. Sarah sat down hard on her couch. "What?" "The police found bank statements in her purse showing transfers from the HOA community fund to her personal account. They're talking about tens of thousands of dollars over the past 2 years. Are you serious?" "Dead serious. The DA is adding fraud and embezzlement charges to the trespassing and burglary charges. Margaret's looking at serious prison time." Sarah's doorbell rang again, more insistently this time. "David, there are reporters outside my house." "What do I do?" "Don't talk to them. Not yet. Let me handle the media for now." "But Sarah, you need to understand this story is going to get bigger before it gets smaller. Margaret wasn't just harassing you. She was stealing from the entire community." After hanging up, Sarah made coffee and tried to process what was happening. The woman who'd made her life hell for 3 years wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was a criminal who'd been using her position to steal money from her neighbors while conducting bizarre midnight pool parties in Sarah's backyard. The irony was overwhelming. Margaret had spent months fining Sarah for excessive water usage, while she was literally swimming in Sarah's pool. Multiple times per week, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her neighbor Tom, who lived 3 houses down. "Board meeting emergency. Session at 10 a.m. Can you be there? We need to discuss the Margaret situation." An hour later, Sarah found herself in the community center conference room with 15 other residents, all talking at once. The mood was a mixture of shock, anger, and vindication. "I can't believe she was stealing from us," said Elena Rodriguez, the association treasurer. "I've been asking for months about discrepancies in the community fund, and she kept telling me it was accounting errors." "Accounting errors, my ass," said Tom. "She was stealing our money to fund her lifestyle while nickeling and diming us to death with fines." "How much did she steal?" asked another resident. Elena consulted her laptop. "From what I can tell so far, at least $37,000 over the past 18 months, but that's just what I can document easily. The real number could be much higher." A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. "That's our money," said Janet Kim, whose house was directly across from Sarah's. "Money we paid for community maintenance, landscaping, the playground equipment. She was supposed to be protecting our investment, not stealing from it. Plus the mailbox color, the pool cameras, the pump timing. I've paid over $2,000 in fines in the past year alone." "Jesus," said Elena. "She was double-dipping, stealing from the community fund and collecting bogus fines." "Has anyone else been getting excessive fines?" Tom asked. Nearly half the room raised their hands. "She'll fine me for having too many flowers in my front yard," said an elderly woman Sarah didn't recognize. Apparently, the color was too vibrant for the community aesthetic. "I got fined for my bird feeder," said another resident. "Fined me for excessive seasonal displays," added Janet. Sarah felt a surge of validation. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't the only one Margaret had been targeting. The woman had been systematically harassing residents while embezzling. Margaret needs to be removed from the board immediately, and we need to figure out how to recover the stolen money. "The police are handling the criminal charges," Tom said. "Under the bylaws, we can call for an immediate Removal vote if a board member is charged with a crime involving association funds. Good. And Sarah, Tom turned to her, I owe you an apology. We all do. You tried to tell us Margaret was out of control, and we didn't listen. Some of us didn't want to get involved, Janet admitted. Margaret was intimidating, and it was easier to just pay the fines and avoid conflict. Well, she's not intimidating anymore, said Alina. She's a criminal defendant facing prison time. After the meeting, Sarah walked home through the neighborhood, seeing it with fresh eyes. For 3 years, she'd felt like an outsider, like the troublemaker who couldn't follow simple community rules. Now she realized she'd been the canary in the coal mine, the first person to recognize that Margaret's behavior was more than just strict rule enforcement. The reporters were still outside her house, so Sarah parked in her garage and entered through the back door. She wanted to check on her pool, the scene of Margaret's crimes, and make sure the police investigation hadn't left any damage. The pool area looked strange without Margaret's presence. For weeks, the woman had been treating it like her private resort, and now it was just Sarah's backyard again. The broken wine glass had been cleaned up, presumably by the police, but there were still signs of Margaret's unauthorized party's furniture, moved slightly out of place, wine stains on the pool deck, even a forgotten hair tie floating in the water. Sarah fished out the hair tie and stared at it. Such a small thing, but it represented something much larger. Margaret had been so comfortable in Sarah's space. We met last night. During the arrest, I have some follow-up questions about the ongoing investigation. Of course. What do you need? We're trying to establish a timeline for Ms. Whitmore's activities. You mentioned she's been issuing frivolous fines for months. Can you provide documentation of those fines? Good. We're also going to need you to calculate the cost of the unauthorized pool usage, water, electricity, chemicals, wear and tear on the equipment. The DA wants to establish the full scope of the theft. Sarah had never considered the actual monetary value of Margaret's pool parties, but thinking about it now, 3 weeks of regular pool usage. It was probably hundreds of dollars in stolen utilities. I'll put together a full accounting, Sarah said. One more thing, Detective Morrison said. We executed a search warrant on Ms. Whitmore's house this morning. We found some interesting items. What kind of items? Pool, toys, towels, and a collection of keys labeled with addresses. Your address was among them, along with 12 other houses in the neighborhood. Sarah's blood ran cold. Are you saying she has keys to other people's houses? That's what we're trying to determine. The keys were labeled as emergency access keys, but we're investigating whether she was using them for unauthorized purposes. My God, she could have been doing this to other people. That's what we're afraid of. We're going to need to interview all the homeowners whose keys were found in her possession. After hanging up, Sarah sat by her pool, trying to process the magnitude of what Margaret had been doing. It wasn't just embezzlement and harassment. The woman had been systematically violating the privacy and property rights of her neighbors, using her position as HOA president to gain access to their homes. How many other residents had Margaret been targeting? The community center was packed beyond capacity, with residents spilling out into the hallway and parking lot. Sarah had never seen so many people at an HOA meeting in 3 years. She'd been lucky if 10 people showed up. Now there were 60 residents crammed into a space designed for 30. The room was divided into 2 distinct camps. On one side sat Margaret's supporters, mostly older residents who'd been in the neighborhood since its development 20 years ago. They wore stern expressions and clutched copies of what appeared to be a prepared statement. On the other side sat the residents who'd been victimized by Margaret's harassment campaign, many holding folders of documentation, fine notices, violation, citations, and correspondence from the HOA. Between them sat the undecided residents, the people who'd stayed out of HOA politics but were now forced to choose sides. At the front of the room stood Elena Rodriguez, who'd assumed temporary leadership of the board in Margaret's absence. She looked nervous but determined as she called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming on such short notice, Elena began. As you know, we're here to address the situation involving Margaret Whitmore and the recent charges filed against her. Point of order, called out Harold Berkowitz, a retired accountant who lived in one of the largest houses in the development. He was Margaret's most vocal supporter and had been spreading conspiracy theories about Sarah's frame job all morning. This meeting is illegitimate. Margaret Whitmore is still the duly elected president of this board, and only she has the authority to call emergency meetings. Harold Alina said patiently, Margaret is currently facing criminal charges for embezzling HOA funds and trespassing on community property. Under Section 4.7 of our bylaws, any board member charged with a crime involving association business is automatically suspended pending resolution of the charges. Those charges are bogus, declared Meredith Walsh, Margaret's next-door neighbor. Margaret has dedicated her life to this community. She's saved us thousands of dollars through her diligent enforcement of community standards. She's stolen $37,000 from the community fund, Tom countered from across the room. Alina has the bank records to prove it. Alleged theft, Harold shot back, based on the word of a woman who was angry about getting legitimate fines for violating community standards. Sarah felt every eye in the room turn to her. She'd been dreading this moment, having to defend herself against people who'd rather believe in Margaret's innocence than accept the evidence of her crimes. I'd like to address that, Sarah said, standing up. Since Harold brought up my legitimate fines, I think everyone should know exactly what Margaret considered violations. She pulled out a folder and began reading. $50 for a mailbox. That was forest green instead of beige. $75 for hanging laundry outside on a Sunday. $125 for planting roses that were too vibrant. $250 for a pool pump that allegedly started 7 minutes early. Murmurs rippled through the room. Some residents looked shocked, others nodded in recognition. And my personal favorite, Sarah continued. $500 for security cameras that were supposedly positioned illegally, cameras I installed to document the harassment I was receiving. Cameras that ultimately recorded Margaret trespassing. On my property for 3 weeks, you set her up, Meredith accused. You knew she was conducting legitimate inspections, and you deliberately recorded her to make it look suspicious. Legitimate inspections. Sarah's voice rose. They had pool parties with wine and floating toys. I've reviewed the security footage. Detective Morrison's voice cut through the noise. Sarah turned, surprised to see the detective entering the room. Ms. Martinez has provided copies to the DA's office as evidence. There's nothing legitimate about what Margaret Whitmore was doing. The room fell silent. I apologize for the interruption, but I felt the community should have accurate information about the ongoing investigation. He moved to the front of the room, his presence commanding immediate attention. Margaret Whitmore has been charged with embezzlement, fraud, burglary, trespassing, and abuse of public trust. The evidence against her is overwhelming. What evidence? Harold demanded. Bank records showing unauthorized transfers from the HOA account to her personal account. Security footage showing her trespassing on private property multiple times. Keys to 13 different houses in this neighborhood found in her possession during the arrest. And documentation of systematic harassment of residents through frivolous fines and citations. Detective Morrison pulled out his notebook. During our investigation, we've discovered that Ms. Whitmore collected over $47,000 in fines from residents over the past 2 years. Many of these fines were for violations that don't exist in your HOA bylaws, Meredith protested. Is it? Detective Morrison turned to the crowd. How many of you have been fined for violations that seemed excessive or arbitrary? Nearly 30 hands went up. How many of you questioned those fines and were told by Margaret that the rules were clearly stated in the bylaws? The same. Hands remained raised. And how many of you actually checked the bylaws to verify those rules existed? Most of the hands went down, leaving only 5 raised. That's what we thought, Detective Morrison said. Margaret Whitmore was collecting money for violations that she made up. It's a classic abuse of authority. Scheme people don't question fines because they assume the person in charge knows the rules. Sarah felt vindicated, but also angry. How many of her neighbors had simply paid Margaret's bogus fines rather than challenge them? How much money had the woman stolen through her fake violation scheme? Furthermore, Detective Morrison continued, we've confirmed that Ms. Whitmore was using emergency access keys to enter residents' homes without permission. We found evidence that she was accessing at least 6 properties regularly, not just Ms. Martinez's pool. What kind of evidence? Tom asked. Security footage from other homes, utility usage patterns that don't match resident behavior, and personal items left behind at multiple properties. The room erupted in angry voices. Sarah could see Margaret's support base crumbling in real time as residents realized they might have been victims too. "This is ridiculous," Harold shouted over the noise. "You're asking us to believe that Margaret was some kind of criminal mastermind sneaking around the neighborhood." "Actually," interrupted Janet Kim, "that would explain a lot." She stood up, looking embarrassed. "Last month, I came home from vacation and found wet towels in my pool house. I thought my teenage son had friends over, but he swore he'd been at his father's house the whole time, and my pool chemicals were always running low," added another resident. "I couldn't figure out why I was going through chlorine so fast. My outdoor shower was always left running," said someone from the back. "I kept thinking I was forgetting to turn it off." Sarah watched in amazement as resident after resident began sharing stories of mysterious incidents that now made perfect sense. Margaret hadn't just been using Sarah's pool, she'd been treating the entire neighborhood like her personal resort. "How could we not have known?" Alina asked, looking stricken. "Because you trusted her," Detective Morrison said. "She was the authority figure, the person in charge of protecting your community. It didn't occur to you that she was the threat." Harold was looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Even if all this is true," he said, "Margaret deserves due process. We can't just throw her out based on accusations." "Harold," Alina interrupted. "We found the bank statements." Margaret transferred money from the community fund to her personal account 43 times over the past 18 months. "That's not an accusation. That's documented fact." Maybe she was reimbursing herself for community expenses with no documentation. No receipts, no board approval. Alina shook her head. "Harold, I know Margaret is your friend, but the evidence is overwhelming." Sarah could see the fight going out of Margaret's supporters. Faced with bank records, security footage, and testimony from multiple residents, their conspiracy theories were crumbling. But Harold wasn't ready to give up. "Fine," he said. "Let's say Margaret made some mistakes. Let's say she bent some rules. That doesn't mean she deserves to have her life destroyed. She's served this community for 15 years. She's been stealing from this community for 15 years, Tom shot back. "How do we know the embezzlement only started 18 months ago?" "Actually, I've been going through old financial records. There are discrepancies, going back at least 5 years, possibly longer." The room fell silent as the full scope of Margaret's betrayal sank in. This wasn't a recent lapse in judgment, it was a long-term criminal enterprise. "We need to vote," Alina said finally. "All in favor of permanently removing Margaret Whitmore from the HOA board and pursuing legal action to recover stolen funds." Hands shot up throughout the room. Sarah counted quickly, at least 50 residents voting in favor. Opposed. Only Harold raised his hand.